The Genshin Impact effect is real. Whether or not you like Genshin Impact's design or the game, you would have to admit that the game is able to come up with unique designs that are striking, unique, and attractive at first glance. After all, Genshin Impact is not afraid to break away from the culturally appropriate and mature designs, which are the aesthetics that I genuinely prefer. When you compare other games to Genshin, it really feels like the other games are lacking in the areas that Genshin is good at. When I played Wuthering Waves again today just to have a feeling, imagining that I'm a new player and I've never compared the games and being negative about it, I genuinely miss playing Genshin. Like Genshin Impact might be a bad game, it might be slow, it might be bad, but the thing is, they're able to make you miss it, which is why I think people are so-called obsessed with Genshin. When Wuthering Waves is released, there are a lot of changes in Genshin that occurred. For instance, when you play the 5.6 Archon quest, you would notice that Duran's design is actually a upgrade from those shonen boy models that we used to have, with its more detailed hair rendering as well as shading. This fact is further supported by Styx's statement on how Hoyoverse is okay with you covering other games, but has a grudge with you covering Wuthering Waves. Now, before Wuthering Waves was in the market, many people would compare games like Tower of Fantasy to Genshin and saying how it's a cheap copy, it's lackluster, it's bad, but is it really? I tried to play I tried to play Tower of Fantasy and I am in love with Lynn's design, honestly. I love her design and I think that she's an amazing character. The issue with this Genshin Impact effect is that after you play Genshin Impact, it's really hard for you to accept the fact that other games can do it better. While people are okay with Tower of Fantasy being unfairly compared to Genshin, despite them being different games, it is suddenly unfair to compare Genshin Impact with the titles like Punishing Grey Raven, Wuthering Waves, even mobile games like Mobile Legends, simply because they are different. But is it really though? Is it really not okay for us to compare Genshin Impact to see how they can do it better? Now, I will admit that Genshin Impact's designs are really good. I love Nicole's design, and I love the fact that Nod-Krai seems to be an upgrade, so called, or improvement from Enconomia. No, I love Enconomia since it first released, even though I hate exploring the region. So when I saw Not Cry having inhabitants compared to compared to Enconomia, that's just basically an empty wasteland, I was excited. However, the problem with the characters in Not Cry is that they don't really seem to be that diverse compared to other characters in this game. Now, let me explain what I mean. So since Genshin Impact 2 point something to 3 point something, we already have characters with a bare minimal, like wearing bare minimal design. No, I love Beidou and Ningguang's design, but it seems that Genshin likes to have this has this design trope where they will have this cloth dangling over their thighs and their lower body. We see that in Llama's design, and we see it in other characters there as well. I don't know Columbina's full body review. I didn't watch the trailer because I didn't want to. But it almost seems as if Genshin is going for a less modest design. One of the more apparent less modest design change is in Syndrome. There are some fans that compare the old design compared to the new design, and you can clearly see that they remove some of the clothing on the characters, and that's when you know they are playable. It's a joke at this point, but honestly, it saddens me to see that the male character designs in Genshin are genuinely improving, while the female characters have this same trope. I would love to see Genshin Impact implementing a more modest design. I like Nicole's design because at least she looks formal than just wearing minimal clothing. Yeah, I get it. Genshin drawing characters with minimal clothing could really be them breaking from the norm. After all, when you think of a Grim Reaper funeral director, you probably think of someone like Undertaker from Black Butler compared to Hu Tao. Black Butler like Undertaker from Black Butler literally just wears like a black long one piece cloth clothing, and that's his design. So when Genshin Impact puts in more effort to design the upper half of Hu Tao, it really makes us stand out. They could tell that Hu Tao is kind of related to death in a way, but I feel that it would have been better if they gave her a mature and culturally appropriate aesthetic. Now, I would like to elaborate as well on what I mean by culturally appropriate. I get it. Most of the time, when we talk about cultural appropriate, we would think of like characters literally wearing clothes from the nations they are inspired from. Like, for example, maybe Ayaka wearing a blue color kimono, just like how Japanese would wear it, or Kazuha wearing a more heavy armor, just like how samurais in the past would wear it, which can seem kind of boring if every game were to follow this same mode. But I like to challenge that idea because if you look at K dramas, Chinese dramas, historical dramas, most of the characters are actually culturally appropriate. They wear their kimonos, they wear their hanfus, they wear their teepaos, and it all still looks different. Like you can tell that the character from 100 Days My Prince is different from the one from Alchemy of Soul. So I would like to debunk the myth that, oh, just because they are culturally accurate, it means that they are boring. I would also like to bring examples from Genshin. Yunjing is an example of a character that's culturally appropriate and modest, and she's beautiful. The only reason why I don't really use her, despite her design, is really because of a kid. I'm just not a fan of polearm characters, and she does feel a bit clunky to play. I've never drawn Yunjing before, and it does take a bit or more time to get used to a design, but I think Yunjing is a really good example of how Genshin managed to make a culturally appropriate design while being interesting. Another design that I really love from Genshin Impact until today is Child. Now, I used to wonder why people love this Tartaglia guy so much, and I just have to say, after studying Child's design, I love his design. Like, Child has this unique aesthetic that I can't seem to replace, even if I were to see another Mafia Fatui Harbinger design. Like, I think Child's design is perfect. I love the way he has his orange hair. I love the way he has this gray clothes. I love the way how tall he looks. I love the way how mature Child looks. And honestly, I would go back to Genshin just for Child. In fact, when I first joined Genshin, it was during Child's banner. I had no idea what was going on. I just remember playing this guy that has like this super cool blades and all. And I was like, did I have this character? Like, what's going on? I know that a lot of people say that Child's gameplay is trash compared to his boss, but I love his design. I think that child has a very uniquely Genshin design, just like Dance Slave. Now, I've already talked about how I love Dance Slave design 6 months ago, and I still feel the same way. Downstage design is amazing. It kind of looks like Dimitri, but it's like Dimitri but better, so-called better design because of how intricate it is. Like Downslave is the only character in Genshin with a scar on his face, and I cannot wait for him to be playable if he was going to be playable. I love Dunsle's design. I think that he's an example of another example of how Genshin can make modest, so-called culturally appropriate designs. Because when you look at Dunslave, you know that he comes from a nation of ruins at the very least. Whereas when you look at other characters like Mavuika, like Sitlali, they kind of feel more like meh. Like when you look at Chaska and then you look at Alekino, the difference is there. Now, I really get why everyone loves the Fontaine design. Now, as someone who loves the OG fashion, seeing Genshin implemented into the game is amazing. And the good thing about Fontaine is that the trailer actually matches up to the game. Remember the day where we saw Chlorine holding the gun and she's shooting and basically the bullet is running, showing like the Navia coming in with the umbrella? Everything that was in the trailer was present in the game. And I think that's why Fontaine is so good because everything that's advertised from Liney, Lynette to Alekino, it's amazing. They managed to bring out whatever the trailer is into the game, and that's what I call peak. Honestly. Now I know I sound like a Hoyo shield talking about it, even though the title is related to Genshin Impact's design problem. But I just really want to talk about the good part of Genshin and why I love it so much. Like I said, after playing Wuthering Waves, I genuinely miss Genshin. There is just a unique feature in Genshin that's not in other games. Now, don't get me wrong, when I played Black Beacon, when I played Wuthering Waves, when I played Mobile Legends, I genuinely enjoyed the game. But the thing is, when I compare it to Genshin, I feel that there is something missing. And I think it's the elements of nostalgia. Now, I think that Genshin is one of the games with more character designs than other anime and other games that I've seen. You know, I remember the days where I would see Sailor Moon recolors, and that's about it. I don't really see people doing a Sailor Moon redesign or a tuxedo mask redesign. I would say that the redesigns are more present in their successor, Pretty Cure. And that brings to my next point, which one of the reasons why I think that Genshin Impact's design is so attractive is because it has a magical girl element into it. When I was redesigning Hu Tao's design, new skin, I realized that her shoe aesthetic reminds me a lot of Pretty Cure's design. Why do people love Pretty Cure's design so much? It's because even though they're all magical girls, they all look different. Like Cure Aqua is different from Cure Mermaid, and I think that Genshin Impact managed to bring out that magical girl into the game. And since a lot of people like myself grew up with magical girls or have at least heard of magical girls or seen their designs, seeing a game, an anime inspired game, reference it so heavily is probably why people love it so much. Like if today I were to throw Kazuha into a magical girl anime, I think that it would work. It would actually work because his design is more fantasy than grounded in realism. So when you put it beside Pretty Cure, he actually matches. And I think that Genshin Impact making males that are inspired by Pretty Cure is such a win because when you look at Pretty Cure or Magical Girl inspired designs, a lot of them is what their name literally are, magical girl. So it's a very girly focused aesthetic. So when Genshin introduced characters like Nouvellette, like Zhongli, like Child, it really feels like I'm in a magical girl world with these hot men that I'm not really able to see in magical girl shows. I mean, I can just pull an example. Sailor Moon has Prince Demande, has Mamoru, has Prince Saphir, but that's about it, you know. So I really think that the reason why Genshin leans so heavily into female designs and like three females is to one male ratio is because of this as well. And now let's talk about the issues with this design trope. You know, like I said, don't get me wrong, the fact that Genshin has a magical girl aesthetic makes it genuinely appealing at first glance. And so when you look at other designs compared to Genshin, you will feel like, it's not Genshin. It doesn't feel good enough. That was an issue I had when I first played Honkai Star Rail. You know, when I first saw Honkai Star Rail, I was like, that's just a redesign from Genshin. You know, like it's just a cheap copy. When Tower of Fantasy was released, people were literally making models out of Genshin Impact characters, and again, it just reinforces the fact that Genshin Impact's design really caused a wave. You know, whether or not you like Genshin Impact, you cannot deny the fact that they did push the anime gaming market to another level. Which is why it's so disappointing that they are not exploring anything else besides this very magical girl, lady like inspire aesthetic. You know, when Genshin Impact first releases all these characters like Beidou, Ningguang, Xingqiu, Hu Tao, you know, Kazuha and stuff, naturally you will see and go, wow, these are beautiful. Because it's not every day we see a design like Hu Tao, you know, it's not every day we see a design like Furina. Maybe there are characters like Furina, but they're just not designed the way like Furina is. So I like to talk about an interesting point. Is it fair to compare Genshin Impact's design to other games? So we have already talked about how powerful the Genshin Impact effect is and how it's still able to draw people in despite the issues that people have with it. And let's talk about Genshin Impact's design realistically and why the issues that it's being not culturally accurate is still present. Now, don't get me wrong, I already talked about how beautiful Genshin Impact's design are, and I'm gonna give credits where credits are due. You know, like I said, in Genshin, there's no really other games that have as many redesigns compared to Genshin. And you could say that people are redesigning out of spite because they don't like the designs like me, but there are also tons of people who are redesigning Genshin Impact's design because they love the characters and just want to see them in an alternative universe. Like, what if Furina wears something more OG sama, you know, or what if Lumine is in a suit, you know, just stuff like that. Like, what if Neuvillette was a mermaid? You know, there are harmless fan designs that show the love and appreciation for the character designs. Even I myself, who have redesigned Albedo countless times, cannot deny the fact that this character has really landed he has really stuck to me for a long time. You know, I love Albedo, even though his story doesn't seem to do his design and whatever justice. I still love Albedo and I want to see him designed better. And I guess that's where the issue comes. When Nod-Krai dropped, it felt like an improvement from Enkonomiya. It wasn't something that was new because today if I were to pluck out the Enkonomiya design, slap it to Nod-Krai, you can say it kind of works. In fact, I would argue and say that the the part of the game that really broke away from the norm is actually Natlan. Natlan broke away from the norm, but it was in a bad way. Now we see characters having these colorful modern tag designs that look more like OC in summer costumes, honestly, or a skin design that threw a lot of people off. I've already discussed in the first part on how Furina's design, like Fontaine in general, is so good because the trailers and the characters and the lore actually match up to each other. And since Fontaine is known to be inspired by France, I'm sure all the French people and people who love the France aesthetic would be thrilled to see it in the game. But I just wish that these country inspired regions could have more diversity. You know what I mean by diversity? We've already seen a lot of characters in Genshin with the elaborate top and short bottom. Even in Nod-Krai, that exception isn't voided, it's still the same thing. Llama's design look really good. I know it looks really cute, but I can't help but feel that they look similar to other characters. It's kind of like how it's kind of like how Flynn's looks like an upgrade from Auroron and Sino and Razor kind of just like meshed together to create him. Now, don't get me wrong, I get why people love his design and love his aesthetic. When I look at his clothes, he kind of reminds me of those leather clothing that I found from Pinterest, which I thought was a nice breakaway from the usual more fantastical design. Flynn's look more like an OC, which makes it attractive, It looks like an OC character. But then when you look at characters like Alice with that half broken head, you really wonder what is going on. Honestly, I wish that Genshin used this opportunity to give not correct characters a more realistic, more NPC-ish design. Now, don't get me wrong, I get that people do not want their characters to look like NPC because they're made to sell. However, I do also think that there are NPC designs in Genshin that are really good. For instance, the Oceanid lady. She doesn't wear something that's unmodest, with revealing clothes, but she really left an impact on me. Maybe it's the 2D art style, but I really love her design. Or Bennett's parents. Bennett's parents, their design is fairly modest, fairly culturally appropriate, what you would see, what you would expect for an NPC. But I do think that it's done really well. Like Bennett's parents from the new story quest from the event. I looked at it and I love it. I love their design. And I do think that it really adds the element it really adds the story element into it. And I wish that more Genshin casts would adapt that kind of design. I mean, you look at Alekino. Alekino is the most modest design character in the entire Genshin for the female lead. And she is one of the best characters of all time. So I do not think that it's just the modest clothing that will throw people off. I think it's how the modest clothing is handled. Now, this is where the problem of comparison comes in. Without comparisons, we wouldn't be able to tell that Genshin Impact's design would look good even if it's modest. Take a look at Reverse 1999. I know that it's a drastically different game from Genshin, but Reverse 1999 is a really good example, an objective example, I could even say that shows how these characters can look good even if they're modest. I get it. People would say that different games have different worlds, different aesthetics, so it's not fair to compare them. But let's be real, whenever we see an OG Sama fashion nowadays, we'll always think, oh, Farina. Whenever we see someone with a blue hair dragon, we'll think like, oh, Nouvellette. Even though these games, shows, and anime has no relation to Genshin at all, and in fact, Genshin themselves are inspired by these anime. So it's fair. So if it is fair for Genshin to be the benchmark for other shows, games, anime, why can't Genshin be held to another standard as well? When people saw Augusta's design from Wuthering Waves, it is understandable why people will compare it to Mavuika, because Wuthering Waves isn't hiding the fact that, look, I took your design and I made it better. Of course, Kuro Games wouldn't say that outright in Genshin's face, but it's so obvious seeing how Septimon is also a country of battle, where the traveler is also struggling, he's fighting, it's so obvious. Rina Sita is so obviously inspired by Fontaine, and it's not surprising because we have to remember that Genshin Impact is a big title. I mean, even Suyo from Mobile Legends seems to look like Zhao. I literally just came across this comparison where they compared Durin with Dirov aside, like side by side. I didn't even think that Dirov looks like Durin or Durin looks like Dirov. But now that I look at it, I'm like, you know what? They kind of resemble each other, but they both look good. Not gonna lie, they both look good. I do think that both designs look good. I am excited to see Durin's full design because I love his fan art. And I just wish that that kind of different aesthetic would be applied to females as well. Because since in Azuma, we always have these female characters with like the elaborate top and then short bottom. And it's the same thing for Nod-Krai. Whereas for the males, we actually see them having diverse outfits. We see Durin have a more OG Sama vibe, while Thins has a more, I would say, leather inspired clothing, for the lack of a better word. Like you can tell for the male characters, they are really going in on the diversity. But the only one that I would be nitpicky about is Varka. I really wish that they gave him a more armor heavy aesthetic, just so that it would be different. Now we have to remember that Not Cry is kind of like Enkanomiya, a grim country. I didn't watch the trailer yet because I chose not to, but I would love to see a more grim, more monotonous design. We already seen so many colorful designs in Genshin, and that's why I think until today, Dragon Spine and Enkanomiya are so refreshing for me, because no matter how many regions are being created, Dragon Spine and Enkanomiya has this really solemn, lonely aesthetic. Like when you step into Dragon Spine, you know that it's a place that no one wants to be in. The fact that after you do the 5.6 the interlude quest, and the heart actually stops beating, it leaves you with that feeling of emptiness, that feeling of isolation, that feeling of desolation. It's the same thing as Enkanomiya. When you travel from a very beautiful mermaid aesthetic into Enkanomiya, suddenly you feel like you are sinking into the depths of the abyss. Before Enkanomiya and Dragon Spine, we don't really see these grim Ripper kind of themes. And what I like about Dragonspine and Enkanomiya is that even though they are grim and sad nations, they are different in their own ways. For instance, Dragonspine is known to be covered in snow, and as the name implies, it's literally a nation, a country, part of Mondstadt that's built from a dragon's spine. When you go to Inazuma, you see the difference between the lively harbor and the difference in Tsurumi Island, yet they are all different from each other. Enkanomiya is so drastically different from Watatsumi Island. It's almost like they decided to dial the palette and make it into the nation, but I would forever love the light that is shining from Enkanomiya. I would go back to Genshin just to stand at Enkanomiya's place again. And I just don't think that the new nations evoke that same feeling. Now, Fontaine is also another example of a breakthrough. Before Fontaine, we don't really have these theater kind of OG Victorian era kind of vibes in the game. So when Fontaine dropped and literally put an opera theater into the game, it was mind blowing, honestly. And what's more mind blowing is that the NPCs are literally inspired by the Victorian designs. As someone who loves Victorian designs and make OCs out of them for like the hundredth time, seeing the NPCs inspired by Victorian designs make me so happy. But then when you see Not-Krai coming, being like a kind of like improvement from Enkanomiya, it leaves us kind of empty. Like, yeah, sure. At first glance, when you look at Not Cry, you will be excited. I was really excited for Not Cry because I love the name Not Cry. I think that it's really interesting. It has a very unique vibe to it. But then I remember that Enkanomiya exists and it really give us that green vibe that we've always needed in the game. Oh, let's say you want to create your own world. There's also the serenity part as well. And I am just really wondering how they're going to make Snezhnaya different compared to Fontaine, or different from Enkanomiya, or different from Dragonspine. I really hope that in Snezhnaya it's going to be kind of like Rena Sita, but a more cold aesthetic to it. I mean, we have seen glimpses of the Snezhnaya from the trailers 1 year ago, and we can see that there is this palace, kind of like the Silver Millennium from Sailor Moon, for the lack of a better word. And I really hope that they bring in this kind of Silver Millennium Kingdom into the game before they end the series in general. I mean, we've seen the diversity. We've seen how Sumeru is different from Ligra, Ligra is different from Mondstadt, and even Netland itself is different. So I hope that Not Cry would be different to bring us a more grounded, mature aesthetic. They've already improved Durin's model. They've improved Dahlia's model. They've improved Yelan's model. They've improved Skirk's model, and even though it's not an upgrade because they all look lifeless compared to Wuthering Waves, I really hope that they'll be willing to step out of their comfort zone, just like they did with their male characters. And please just give Varka more armor. Give him beard. We really need a playable character with beard. I know we are not a fan of that, but Wuthering Waves has a playable character with beard. HSR has a character with beard, and people still pull for them. So having a beard is not a factor to it's not a factor into consideration whether or not people would actually pull for them. Same for modesty. Yunjing is a character with modest design. People still pull for her. People love her design. People love Alekino's design. People still pull for her. Jean has a more modest design and she looks infinitely better than her first design. Hoyoverse has already done their job to give their characters a more mature design and a more modest design. Just look at Xingqiu. When Xingqiu had that new skin, I had to get it because, oh my goodness, since the beginning when I had Xingqiu, I felt that there was something uncanny about his design, and I am so glad that they gave him a Seal Phantom Hive inspired skin. And I really hope that Genshin would create more skins, more alternative designs for their characters. Now, I get it. Fans will say that, oh, but Genshin Impact is focused on their lore, on their gameplay, and not on their skins. But come on, Black Beacon is 4 months old. Actually, less than 4 months old, and they managed to give us alternative skins. They managed to give us alternative skins on release. Same for Mobile Legends, same for other games, Black Beacon, Tower of Fantasy as well. They also give alternative outfits for their characters. Now, I want to say that skins is not a means to say that, like, it's not saying that the developers have given up with their story design. I don't think so. I think it's more like allowing the fans to see a character in a different perspective but from the canon universe. Like now we have a Yelan skin and she's in a Fontaine inspired aesthetic, which is good because we see her in her China mafia gambling aesthetic, and now she's in her Fontaine, more so called modest aesthetic, I would say. So I hope they implement it. I mean, people don't like Mavuika's design, and I do think that them implementing another design that's more faithful to the NPCs as well as the world would definitely improve the game. Now, I would like to conclude this whole chapter, this whole video with this. It is true that redesigning a character out of spite is not the best compared to redesigning a character out of love. It is definitely not a very good thing to compare different games together because they are different, but it is the comparisons that help us to see how the characters can improve. In the art community, in the artist world, inspiration is actually a good thing. It's a good thing to be inspired by other people's character designs and add your own element. I've learned a lot about character designing from redesigning Genshin Impact character designs. I've learned a lot about character designs from AI even. And I just want to say that character design is definitely not easy. There are a lot of elements that you have to take into consideration, whether it's the world, the lore, the backstory, how they match with other characters, and what a good design is subjective. And even if a character designer were to put in their all to design the character, there will still be people who prefer another design. But I just hope that this whole Genshin Impact effect would not stop other people from exploring other games, give other character designs a chance, give other games a chance, experience the different diversity that other games have that Genshin might not, and enjoy the diversity that Genshin might not that other games have, which is something that's tougher for people to accept. But I fully accept it. And next time,